Fabian approached the door and knocked gently. No response. He called Colleen. Silence. Another knock. Still nothing. A growing unease settled in his chest. He hesitated at the threshold, torn between respecting Colleen's privacy and acting on the rising tide of fear inside him. After a moment's pause, heart pounding, Fabian made the agonizing decision to turn the doorknob and step inside. What he saw stopped him cold. A wave of shock and disbelief washed over him, his breath catching in his throat. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and, with a voice tight with panic, called emergency services. Struggling to keep his composure, he followed the dispatcher's instructions as best as he could, kneeling beside her, trying to help, trying to do something. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved quickly, working with the calm focus of seasoned professionals. But after a few minutes, their expressions grew solemn. It was over. Colleen Rebello had passed away. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. On the surface, Andre Rebello's life in Perth, Western Australia, appeared nothing short of ideal. His days were spent in a sleek, modern home nestled in a desirable suburb, one he shared with his long-term partner, Gracie Piscopo. Together, they projected an image of effortless luxury. To the casual observer scrolling through Instagram or TikTok, they were the embodiment of modern success. Radiant, stylish, and seemingly living a life most could only dream about. Followers couldn't get enough. Their digital presence was a masterclass in lifestyle branding. Impeccably curated posts featured sun-soaked getaways, designer wardrobes, and an enviable blend of glamour and domestic bliss. They didn't just look happy, they looked perfect. But behind the lens, behind the polished aesthetics and filter-enhanced smiles, existed a story far more nuanced, one steeped in sacrifice, silent compromises, and emotional undercurrents that never made it into a caption. Andre and Gracie's paths first crossed in 2015, a year that would prove pivotal for both of them. At the time, Andre was just 19 years old. Born in 1996, he was youthful, optimistic, and quietly ambitious. Gracie, with her striking looks and undeniable charisma, carried herself with a determination that was impossible to ignore. Though she was still finding her footing in life, working as a receptionist at a local gym, her eyes were fixed firmly on a bigger future. She wasn't interested in ordinary. She was determined to carve out a space for herself in a new digital frontier that was rapidly changing the nature of fame and fortune. And she did. With unwavering consistency, Gracie began posting images online, carefully composed snapshots that highlighted her sense of style, her beauty, and a growing confidence in her public persona. As her social media following grew, so did her opportunities. Brand deals began to roll in. Invitations to high-profile events followed. In just a few short years, Gracie had successfully transitioned from front desk worker to one of Perth's most recognizable influencers, pulling in approximately $170,000 annually through sponsorships, affiliate marketing, and product partnerships. The transformation was dazzling. Her digital success translated into real-world affluence. She began wearing designer labels and staying in five-star hotels. Holidays meant exotic destinations, not road trips. Her life became the very definition of aspirational, and Andre was swept into it. Suddenly, the young man who once lived a relatively modest life found himself attending exclusive events, dining in high-end restaurants, and traveling first class. Their relationship became as much a part of Gracie's brand as her fashion sense or fitness regime. Together, they were a social media power couple, beautiful, seemingly grounded, and raising a child in a home that looked straight out of a luxury design catalog. To the outside world, their relationship was the stuff of modern fairy tales. They drove the newest Range Rover, lounged in tastefully decorated interiors, and regularly posted pictures with their young son, an adorable addition who only enhanced their brand's appeal. Their followers adored them. The couple was seen as authentic, relatable despite their success, and deeply in love. But the reality behind the images was far more complex. As Gracie's fame soared, the demands on her time and energy increased dramatically. Managing a thriving influencer career is a full-time job, and then some. Negotiating contracts, creating content, handling taxes, brand partnerships, and public relations. It was a logistical maze. Recognizing the growing need for structure behind the scenes, Andre made a life-altering decision. He dropped out of university and chose to fully support Gracie's burgeoning career. He took on the role of her assistant, a position that demanded long hours and constant availability. He was the silent architect of her success, fielding calls, reviewing contracts, organizing shoots, handling travel arrangements, and managing finances. Yet despite the immense responsibility, his own earnings remained modest. At just $20,000 a year, Andre was investing much more than he was financially receiving. It was a sacrifice he believed in at the time, fueled by love and a shared vision. Though present in her content, Andre was never the central figure. Gracie remained the face of the brand. She was the one audience connected with, the one companies courted for collaborations. He was often the one behind the camera, making sure the lighting was perfect, that their child's clothes were clean and color-coordinated, that the captions were polished. He was her anchor, but often invisible to the public eye. As their son grew, so did their online empire. Parenting content became a new vertical of their business. Gracie secured lucrative deals with baby brands and family-focused companies. Every moment, from family outings to morning routines, was packaged, posted, and monetized. Their digital life was a constant performance, requiring near-constant attention and upkeep. Over time, however, Andre began to feel the weight of invisibility. While he was proud of what they had built, a quiet longing grew within him, a desire to create something of his own, something that wasn't tied to someone else's spotlight. That's when he discovered cryptocurrency. The decentralized, fast-moving world of digital assets offered something he hadn't felt in years: possibility. Andre immersed himself in it, studying markets, reading forums, joining online communities. He wasn't chasing quick money. He was chasing purpose, autonomy, and maybe even redemption. He spoke to Gracie about it often, confident that the risks would eventually pay off. He believed that crypto could be their next chapter, one where he could finally step into the spotlight, not as an assistant, but as a creator of his own legacy. But not everyone shared his enthusiasm. Andre's mother, Colleen, had watched her son's transformation with a mix of pride and growing concern. A mother of 4, 3 sons and a daughter, Colleen had always emphasized the importance of education, consistency, and long-term planning. Her vision for Andre's future had included university, a stable career, and perhaps a quiet life free from the volatility of social media fame. To Colleen, Andre's decision to step away from school and dive into an unpredictable world felt risky, maybe even reckless. She worried that he was becoming consumed by an image-driven lifestyle that, while beautiful on the surface, lacked the solid foundation needed for a lasting future. She shared these fears with a close friend, often questioning whether Andre's sacrifices were truly being recognized or appreciated. She admired Gracie's hustle, but feared the dynamic was unbalanced. In her eyes, Andre was giving so much of himself, his time, his energy, his ambitions, while standing perpetually in someone else's shadow. Colleen's love for her son made her fear for his emotional well-being. Fame, she knew, could be fleeting. And when the lights dimmed, when trends shifted, when the audience moved on to the next viral face, what would be left? Despite the many challenges life had thrown her way, Colleen remained steadfast in her devotion to her family. She was a mother in the truest sense of the word, strong, nurturing, and unshakably loyal. Even when her own marriage came to an end in 2010, leaving her to raise 4 children as a single parent, she never once stepped back from her responsibilities. Through long days and uncertain nights, she stood firm, supporting her children not just emotionally, but with a kind of structure and moral guidance that would serve as the foundation of their lives. Colleen worked as a teacher, an underappreciated yet vital role she took to with humility and purpose. The job wasn't glamorous, and the pay was never lavish, but it was work that mattered. It provided for her family, and more importantly, it allowed her to be present for her children in the ways that counted. Over the years, she juggled school drop-offs, work meetings, doctor appointments, and parent-teacher conferences. She made home-cooked meals when time allowed, and always made space to listen, to advise, to be the person her kids could turn to when the world felt overwhelming. And when the house eventually grew quieter, when the children began stepping into their own adult lives, Colleen made a choice that was as brave as it was inspiring. Rather than settle into a quieter chapter, she decided to chase a dream of her own. She returned to school in her mid-50s, driven by a desire to serve others in an even deeper way. In 2020, at 58 years old, she proudly earned a degree in healthcare. It was more than a diploma. It was a symbol of resilience and second chances. Her family cheered her on with pride as she stepped into a new professional chapter, one filled with purpose and optimism. But that bright new beginning would never fully take shape. On the morning of May 25, 2020, Colleen's household was in its usual rhythm. The day had started with its typical flow: quiet conversations over breakfast, preparations for work and study, and the simple comfort of a family moving through their routines. Her youngest son, Fabian, was still living at home. Her daughter, Monique, had recently moved back in temporarily while completing her paramedic training. Living with their mother made the daily commute easier for Monique, and for Colleen, having two of her children back under the same roof was a welcome gift. That morning, Fabian and Monique each went about their responsibilities. Fabian, who worked part-time at a local supermarket, needed to be dropped off by 10 a.m. and picked up at 2 p.m., a routine Colleen handled with the same reliability she had shown for years. She was known for being punctual and dependable. She didn't miss appointments. She didn't forget calls. But that afternoon, as Fabian finished his shift and waited outside the store, something felt off. The familiar car was nowhere in sight. Minutes passed, then more. He pulled out his phone and tried calling her. Once, twice. Eventually, he called 13 times. Each one went unanswered. It wasn't a long walk back home, perhaps 10 or 15 minutes, but Fabian felt a growing unease. His mother had never left him stranded before. She wasn't someone who would ignore multiple calls without a word. And though Colleen had been in generally good health, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Colleen had been managing a few minor health conditions. Nothing alarming, nothing that ever seemed to hold her back. She had mild heart concerns and a thyroid condition called Hashimoto's, which she monitored and treated with care. She was active, alert, and as far as anyone could tell, in good spirits that very morning. Fabian reminded himself of that as he walked. He tried not to jump to conclusions. When he got home, the house appeared still. Nothing was obviously out of place. And then he heard the sound of running water, the bathroom shower specifically. A flicker of relief passed over him. Maybe she'd simply been delayed and lost track of time. But the more he listened, the more that small hope began to fade. The water had been running for quite a while, and despite his repeated calls, Colleen hadn't answered. He knocked on the door. No response. He called her name. Silence. Another knock. Still nothing. Torn between respecting her privacy and responding to his mounting worry, Fabian made the difficult decision to open the door. What he saw shook him to his core. Something was undeniably wrong. Acting on instinct and sheer panic, Fabian carefully moved her to the center of the room and reached for his phone. With trembling hands and a voice heavy with urgency, he dialed emergency services. Every second dragged like an hour. As he waited for help to arrive, he followed the instructions given to him over the phone, trying his best to provide aid. Despite his best efforts, a quiet dread had already taken hold. When paramedics arrived, they quickly took over. The professionals worked with speed and precision, but it was soon clear that nothing more could be done. Colleen Rebello had passed away. There were no obvious signs explaining what had happened. No warning. No goodbye. Fabian, overwhelmed and devastated, messaged his sister. He needed someone, anyone, to come home. He couldn't process it alone. His hands still shook as he texted Monique and tried reaching out to their older brother Andre. But Andre didn't respond immediately. He was with his partner Gracie and their son. It wasn't until Monique herself began calling and texting him that Andre finally arrived home with his family in tow. By then, the house had changed. The ordinary rhythm of the morning had been replaced with a heavy stillness. A quiet shock filled the air. Just hours earlier, everything had seemed normal. Monique had spoken with her mother that very morning. Nothing had appeared unusual. Colleen had seemed calm, focused, and upbeat. Completely herself. The suddenness of her passing didn't just feel tragic, it felt inexplicable. An autopsy was later performed. The results offered no closure. The official cause of death was listed as undetermined. For her children, that ambiguity left a wound that refused to heal. The idea that their energetic, capable mother could pass away without warning or explanation didn't make sense. And then there were the details. Small, unsettling inconsistencies that began to weigh heavily on the family's minds. Colleen had certain habits. Routine was important to her, especially in her morning rituals. One of those habits was removing her gold wristwatch before stepping into the shower. She'd done it for years. That morning, Fabian found the watch still on her wrist. It was a small thing, but deeply out of character. She also had a custom of removing her jewelry before bathing. On that day, the rings and necklace she typically set on the vanity were still on her. Even more odd, the anti-slip mat, something she always placed inside the tub before showering, was left hanging over the edge. Individually, these may have seemed trivial, but for those who knew her intimately, they were red flags. This wasn't the way Colleen did things. She was consistent, meticulous. The fact that every one of her usual steps had been skipped on the very morning she passed away felt more than coincidental. It felt wrong. To her family, those seemingly minor deviations weren't just details. They were signals, whispers of a truth that remained just out of reach. And as days turned into weeks, they were left with more questions than answers. Police officers who arrived that day conducted their preliminary checks with care and methodical precision. The front door was locked. The windows were secured. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no ransacked drawers or displaced valuables. To the casual observer, and even to seasoned investigators, it appeared to be a quiet home where a quiet tragedy had simply occurred. With no evidence of foul play and no injuries pointing to external causes, the official report leaned toward natural causes. The absence of trauma, the locked-down house, and the inconclusive autopsy led authorities to a reluctant conclusion. Colleen's passing, however sudden, was due to internal medical factors. It was a heartbreaking loss for her children, but it was assumed to be one of nature's cruel mysteries. And for a while, that was the end of it. But the calm didn't last long. Just weeks after Colleen's death, a phone call would turn everything upside down. It came not from law enforcement, but from an insurance provider. Their inquiry wasn't focused on Colleen's death itself, but on something adjacent. They were investigating fraud. The red flag had come from within their own internal processing department. Suspicious documents, inconsistencies in the paperwork, and an unusual timeline had triggered concerns. The name attached to all of it? Andre Rebello, Colleen's second eldest son. What followed next would fracture a family, send shockwaves through their community, and lead authorities down a deeply unsettling path. As police reopened their investigation, they quickly learned that just 1 week prior to Colleen's passing, Andre had quietly arranged not one, but 3 separate life insurance policies, all taken out in his mother's name. The combined payout from those policies totaled more than $1 million Australian. In each case, Andre was listed as the sole beneficiary. Not a single mention was made of his siblings, Monique, Fabian, or Julian. The timeline was alarming, and more alarming still was what happened in the days immediately following Colleen's death. Andre didn't wait. Almost as soon as the funeral arrangements had been made, he contacted each of the insurance companies and attempted to file the claims. Two of the providers quickly identified discrepancies and denied the claims outright, citing the suspicious proximity between policy activation and Colleen's passing. Only one company was still reviewing the claim, pending additional documentation. And that's when the inconsistencies began to multiply. One of the claim forms submitted by Andre contained a critical error. Colleen's date of birth was listed incorrectly. Instead of her actual birth date, the form bizarrely included Andre's own. It seemed an impossible mistake to make if the paperwork had truly been filled out with care. There were other oddities. The medical records included in the submission appeared hastily prepared. One report stated that Colleen had died due to a ruptured aneurysm causing a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a term that might sound medically valid but directly contradicted the official autopsy, which had not identified any such event. Investigators questioned where that information had come from and why it had been included. But perhaps the most unsettling revelation came with the discovery of a new will, one allegedly drafted and signed by Colleen not long before her passing. This document, unlike her previous statements of intent, named only Andre as the sole heir to her entire estate. There was no mention of her other 3 children, no provisions, no division of assets, no explanation. To the rest of the family, it felt like a betrayal of everything Colleen stood for. She had always been fair. She believed in balance, in sharing, in making sure that each of her children, regardless of their life paths, felt equally loved and supported. The idea that she would single out one child in such a sweeping way was completely at odds with the woman they knew. Authorities dug deeper. The new will came with supporting documents, including psychological evaluations meant to demonstrate that Colleen had been of sound mind when making the changes. But those too came under scrutiny. Investigators determined that several of the evaluations were falsified. The dates were inconsistent, and some of the medical professionals listed had no record of ever treating Colleen. Then came the most disturbing twist of all. Among the digital files submitted by Andre was a voice recording, purportedly of Colleen, affirming her desire to name Andre as the sole inheritor. On the surface, it sounded convincing, until experts analyzed the file. What they uncovered was a chilling detail. The voice had been digitally generated. Using advanced AI software, someone had created a synthetic voice file that sounded like Colleen, but wasn't her. It was an attempt to simulate authenticity, and it failed under scrutiny. When confronted, Andre didn't deny his involvement. Instead, he offered an explanation that raised even more questions. He claimed that everything had been done with his mother's knowledge and blessing. According to him, Colleen had entrusted him to handle her financial matters and had asked him to ensure that any inheritance, once secured, would eventually be distributed equally among the siblings. To some, it might have sounded plausible, but to investigators, and especially to Colleen's other children, it felt like a desperate narrative crafted under pressure. The evidence told a different story. The life insurance policies were rushed and last minute. The claim attempts were immediate. The paperwork was inconsistent. The forged documents, the AI audio file, the exclusion of every other sibling, it all pointed to a coordinated effort, one that went far beyond mere oversight. For Monique, Fabian, and Julian, the betrayal was not just about money. It was about trust. It was about family. And it was about a deep and irreparable wound that now lived between them and the brother they once believed in. Julian, the eldest, took on the heavy task of sorting through their mother's estate. It was a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but one he accepted with quiet dignity. He moved into Colleen's house and began organizing her affairs, hoping to bring clarity and closure to the chaos. But almost immediately, he hit a wall. Vital documents were missing. Colleen's driver's license, her Medicare card, tax records, even her birth certificate, gone. When Julian questioned Andre, his younger brother admitted to having taken them. He claimed it was necessary in order to handle the insurance process. But the explanation didn't sit well, especially in light of what came next. The family discovered that Andre had redirected all of Colleen's mail to his own address, effectively cutting off communication between important agencies and the people still living in her house. There had been no practical reason for this. Monique and Fabian were still residing there. The estate matters could have been handled from the home. The choice to reroute everything felt strategic. As the days turned into weeks following Colleen Rebello's unexpected passing, the cloud of grief that hovered over her family began to shift into something darker, something far more unsettling. What began as quiet mourning slowly gave way to persistent doubt. Whispers turned into questions, and those questions began to demand answers. Could it be possible that Colleen's death had not been a tragic fluke of nature? Could someone close to her, someone she trusted implicitly, have played a role in her demise? And if so, why? The suspicions didn't emerge all at once. They accumulated slowly, gathering weight as inconsistencies began to pile up. At the center of those suspicions stood Colleen's own son, Andre Rebello, who, by then, had already raised more than a few eyebrows for his handling of her life insurance claims, his secrecy around the will, and his strange, sudden behavior in the days that followed her death. In light of new developments, police made the decision to reopen the case. This time, they approached it with fresh eyes and deeper scrutiny. Detectives began re-interviewing everyone connected to Colleen, not just her children, but also extended family members, neighbors, and, crucially, Andre's partner, Gracie Piscopo, the high-profile influencer who, like Andre, had built a life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. And then came the first major breakthrough. Colleen's sister came forward with information that would send shockwaves through the investigation. She recalled an odd moment from the very day Colleen passed away, May 25th, 2020. At around 1:30 p.m., she had driven past Colleen's house, something she did frequently. But on this particular day, something stood out. A car was parked in the driveway that she didn't recognize. At the time, it barely registered. Just another vehicle, perhaps a friend visiting or a delivery driver. But in the emotionally heightened atmosphere of Colleen's funeral a few days later, she saw that very same vehicle again. This time, she saw Andre and Gracie getting into it. That observation carried serious implications. It meant that Andre had been at the house later than he had originally claimed. Up until that point, Andre had never told anyone, not even his siblings, that he had seen their mother that day. He had kept that detail completely to himself. It wasn't until police confronted him with the timeline provided by Colleen's sister that he finally admitted, yes, he had visited their mother that morning. He claimed he had only stayed for 45 to 50 minutes, just enough time for a short chat. And then he said something even more unexpected. According to Andre, during that visit, Colleen had expressed feelings of despair. He claimed she had opened up about her fear of growing older, her anxiety about being a burden, and her belief that life no longer held much meaning. He portrayed her as vulnerable and emotionally fatigued. He even suggested that their conversation had prompted him to take out the insurance policies, not out of greed, but as part of a plan she allegedly supported, one meant to secure the family's financial future. But that narrative quickly began to crumble, because Gracie, his longtime partner and mother of his child, had her own account of that same day, and it didn't match his. Gracie recalled that she had been home, preparing for lunch plans with her cousin. She remembered getting ready, applying makeup, and choosing an outfit. But as the minutes ticked by, Andre was nowhere to be found. He hadn't told her he was leaving. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't mention a visit to his mother's house. As she waited, her concern turned to frustration. She began calling him 12 times, according to her phone's call log. Every call went unanswered. She sent him messages. Still no reply. Eventually, Andre returned home around 2 p.m., acting as if nothing was unusual. Gracie, confused and annoyed, chose not to press him for details. They were already under pressure. Financial, emotional, personal, and she didn't want to spark an argument. But later that afternoon, she remembered something that struck her as deeply unsettling. Before they went to lunch, Andre had messaged his mother, asking if she could watch their son later that evening. It was an innocent request, unless, of course, he already knew that Colleen wouldn't be able to respond. Investigators found that chilling. The combination of his unexplained absence, his misleading timeline, and his strangely timed message prompted authorities to escalate their efforts. With the approval of a court order, they installed surveillance devices inside Andre and Gracie's home, a camera in the living room and a microphone in the bedroom. They were hoping for a confession, or at least an unguarded moment that might offer insight into Andre's state of mind. For 3 months, they monitored the household. What they captured was deeply revealing. It became clear that Gracie had no knowledge of the insurance policies. In one recorded conversation, she confronted Andre angrily, blindsided and furious. The discovery had shaken her. Not only did she feel betrayed, but she also feared for her reputation and career. As a public figure who built her brand on trust and relatability, being associated with a scandal of this magnitude could destroy her livelihood. She reminded Andre of the stakes. If you've done something to your mother and it comes out, you will go to prison. But Andre appeared eerily calm, almost dismissive. He didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he insisted everything was under control. He still believed the money would come through. In fact, he had already begun planning to leave the country once the payout arrived. There was a confidence in his voice that disturbed investigators. He seemed so certain, which begged the question, why take such a risk at all? On social media, Andre and Gracie projected a life of luxury. They were seen driving a sleek white Range Rover, living in a stunning home, wearing designer clothing, and taking glamorous vacations. But once police began digging into their finances, a very different picture emerged. The house wasn't owned. It was rented at $800 per week. The Range Rover was financed, not purchased. The vacations were often sponsored or comped by brands in exchange for exposure. Their entire lifestyle was an elaborate facade, maintained for followers and partnerships, but not backed by financial stability. Behind closed doors, they were in trouble. At the time of Colleen's death, the couple had accumulated over $120,000 in debt. They were months behind on rent and car payments. Gracie had a $40,000 unpaid tax bill, one she hadn't even been aware of. Andre had been in charge of their financial affairs, keeping her in the dark about their true situation. The so-called savior plan, Andre's venture into cryptocurrency, had utterly failed. After 3 years of effort and countless hours lost to trading forums and digital predictions, the result was almost laughable. A portfolio worth just $20. The illusion was collapsing. The pressure to maintain their online image, their lifestyle, and their personal brand had become unbearable. In that desperate place, cornered by debt and clinging to relevance, Andre seemed to see only one way out: a shortcut to millions. By taking out 3 life insurance policies in his mother's name without her knowledge and quietly placing himself as the sole beneficiary, Andre had laid the foundation for what investigators now believed could be a carefully calculated plan. With the money from the insurance claims, he could erase their mounting debts. But that vision came crashing down in November 2022, when authorities arrested him and charged him with the murder of his mother, Colleen Rebello. The trial began nearly 2 years later, in October 2024, and would go on to last 8 weeks, each day revealing deeper layers of deception, grief, and unanswered questions. Throughout the trial, expert witnesses, forensic analysts, behavioral specialists, and digital investigators testified to one unsettling theme: that while no direct physical cause could be identified, indicators of foul play were present, and the behavior surrounding Colleen's death pointed strongly toward manipulation and intent. Then came the digital trail, or rather, the lack of one. Investigators testified that in July 2020, just 2 months after Colleen's passing, Andre had completely wiped his computer's hard drive. That in itself raised suspicions. But what followed was even more damning. A series of forged documents submitted to insurance companies in an attempt to secure the $1 million payout. Andre maintained his innocence throughout. He claimed she had been worried about the family's financial stability and had asked him to take care of the logistics, trusting him to later divide the assets fairly among his siblings. But the jury wasn't convinced. On December 5th, 2024, after just 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty. Andre Rebelo was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 25 years.